Please welcome back Chairman, Global Futures Group, Jerry Hulton.
Have a seat, Bob. So good afternoon. It's good to be back. Hey, I want to introduce Bob Steele. Bob Steele's had a fabulous career. I'm going to give you 3 high points. There's more that you could say, but first, Undersecretary of the Treasury, a great and important role. Secondly, the President of the Economic Development Corporation for Mayor Bloomberg, had a big role in shaping the environment, the entrepreneurial and innovative qualities in New York City. And third now as a investment banker with Perella Weinberg. So this is going to be a great discussion. We have about 15 minutes, so we're going to have to talk fast. We could cover a lot of things. We're going to cover one big thing, which is Bob's role in the applied science competition, which resulted in, if you look up the river, Cornell moving to Roosevelt Island. This is a fabulous change in the intellectual quality of New York. It has lots of repercussions. Bob's going to talk about that. So we're going to start out with Bob. So there you are with Mayor Bloomberg and the team. It's 2008-9, as I recall. We'd had the crash. What was going on in your thinking, and how did this idea come up? And tell us a little bit about how you then organized it and made it happen.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jerry, and it's great to be here at the Navy Yard, which is amazing, and at Dugal. You know, I think that to move to the point that after the 2008 economic recession, the reality was that the New York City economy had a lot of weight and was driven to a large degree by financial services. And it was the Mayor Bloomberg's idea that we should think about how to diversify the economy of the city. So when we talked about that, we surveyed businesses around New York and asked them what they thought the missing ingredient was if you looked out in the future for New York City to be a successful economy. And we heard back from businesses all over that the big deficiency was very high-level skills in applied sciences and engineering. That if you think about economies, we have 2,000 years of an agrarian economy, we have 200 years of an industrial economy, but if you look forward in the next decades, then it's a knowledge and information economy, and the big fulcrums or the drivers to that are very high-level skills in applied science and engineering. And while New York City had an excellent higher education, post-secondary education system, to be quite honest, we were really deficient in applied sciences and engineering. If you compare to Boston, to California, to Atlanta, to Cleveland, and other places, New York City did not have the active ingredients that we thought you needed for the future. So then what do you do about that is the question. And to move ahead, then what we started at Mayor Bloomberg's initiative was what we call the Applied Sciences Project. And our idea was, how do we get schools to come here, and how do we have more PhD level applied scientists and engineers?
So in fact, at the time they did this, I was president of the engineering school in Brooklyn, an independent school, Brooklyn Poly. At the time I took it over, it was sinking into bankruptcy, ranked 80th of engineering schools in the nation, and it suffered the very fate you described. So I said, I got to turn it around. I was part of the turnaround to get that moving back. But this competition had a real impact on NYU and Columbia in my mind, because it said, wow, we cannot any longer stand on our laurels. We need to begin to get into the game. So talk about your thinking about it.
Well, what we did was we offered $100 million, and we offered 4 pieces of real estate if anyone would come to New York City and build a PhD level applied science and engineering program. And so the 4 places we offered were Governor's Island, Roosevelt Island, Farm Colony, and then about 300 yards north of here in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so 27 schools responded to our RFP, and in the end we had a contest that lasted about a year, and the first winner of the gold medal was the Cornell Technion project, which is going up on Roosevelt Island. And there are certain performance standards that Cornell Technion has to do. They have to build a certain amount of space, they have to have a certain amount of professors, they have to have a certain amount of students, and then the money will be released to them over time. And then they're responsible for building it. So when you go up on either side of Roosevelt Island, you can see all the buildings going up, and next autumn will be the first classes on Roosevelt Island at Cornell Tech. But they haven't been waiting for that. Since the project began 4 years ago, they're already having students and have graduated classes at their temporary offices in the Google building in Chelsea. Now, in addition to Cornell Technion, we also gave money to NYU, which adopted Poly and is building 370 J Street. We gave money to Carnegie Mellon, which is locating here in Steiner Studios, just a little bit north of here. We also gave money to Columbia to expand their engineering efforts. And we also gave money to Mount Sinai, who's doing a joint project with RPI. So all of those are initiatives that came out of Mayor Bloomberg's strategy.
And the ripple effects are enormous. In my case, Polytechnic moved from being 80th, as I said, to being now 43rd in the nation. So they've moved up 40 points, and they're on their way to moving into the top 20. And NYU made a major commitment to engineering that they had never made before until you ran this competition. So it has a powerful effect on lifting everybody, and it's the power of the leverage you got from the money you put on the table has been enormous.
Yeah, I think, listen, I believe that if you looked at it in terms of an analytical perspective, New York City put $100 million in the pot. Cornell alone is spending $2 billion to build and invest in the facility. That doesn't include any return on the jobs and the future economic impact of the people that will go through. And you know, sometimes people say that, well, why do you need the applied scientists and engineering? Is this all about Google and Facebook, et cetera? I don't think that's right. I think you're really missing a big part of the boat. The reality is, if you look at the New York City economy and you look at communications, retail, advertising, legal profession, these are all businesses that will be changed by new business models. And if we have the right skills here in New York City, then the change or the disruption can happen here as opposed to happening someplace else. And so there's both an offensive aspect of getting Google to come here or getting Facebook to come here, but there's the defensive aspect of making sure that these professions of communication, law, advertising, retail are protected for the long run also.
So the Bloomberg administration also often used a model much different than the standard government model. Standard government model is I create an organization, I own it, I run it, I have no bottom line, and I have a performance problem. You took a much different approach, not only with this competition, but with Brooklyn Bridge Park, with any number of other projects, the High Line, where you essentially said, I need private sector thinking, I need the competition of the market to discipline this operation. Talk a little bit about how you saw that picture.
Well, I think this is a Bloombergian principle, if I can make up a word, but I think our view was that we at the city should outline an idea, for example, the Applied Science Initiative, and we should get feedback from people on how they think we should shape it, because we don't know the most. And when we did the Applied Sciences project, we issued an RFPI, Request for Expressions of Interest. Then we learned from that. We turned it into an RFP, and we also created a council of experts to give us advice. We didn't think we in government knew that much about running a university, so how do we get people to help us as opposed to think we should design it? So after doing all that, we issued the RFP, we had respondents respond, we gave them the money consistent with them performing, but most importantly, the city doesn't run it. We have a 99-year lease with Cornell and Cornell Technion, and they're going to run it. And it's in a locked box. The city can't put their fingers in. The city can't tell them what curriculum to do. The city can't tell them how to organize and what to pay people or anything else. The 60 trustees of Cornell are responsible for the next 99 years. Now, some people think that's really wrong, that the city should, it's the city money, the city should have their hands on it, and the city should shape the clay of the project. We think the city should shape the clay at the start, but then we believe the 60 trustees and the leadership of Cornell will do a better job running this than in the next 99 years. What will there be, 15 or 20 mayors? How do we know what each one of those 15, 20 mayors will do? I'm a lot more optimistic that Cornell's been going on and running a university for now more than 150 years. I'm pretty optimistic they can do it for the next 99 years in a consistent fashion. And I think that was a Bloomberg strategy, was that having people like that run it and be the stewards is the better strategy.
I think my experience is, working cities around the world, it's a powerful force because you leverage a lot more intelligence. You get the market discipline, you get the ability to be innovative and creative. I think it's been quite productive. So here we
I
are.
think the other thing, too, is that Cornell will be more likely to stop doing something.
Yeah.
If it's not working, I think that governments find it hard to kind of say, time out, this isn't going great, let's stop. And I think other organizations are a little bit better than governments, and so that's a better return for the taxpayer than continuing to do things that might not be as productive because you've been doing them for a long time. But not everybody agrees with me, but that was a point of view that we had very strongly.
Yeah. So this is Roosevelt Island, Cornell, a great success. The world noticed, and did cities around the world call you up and say, oh, we want to do the exact same thing in our city? And what do you think? Can every city do this?
Well, yeah, I must have had, I had a lot of calls saying, hi, could you come show us your playbook? And the idea was you were going to hand them the recipe and that they could just go home and get the ingredients and make it the same way. And my own view is that the principles are good for almost any project, but I think you have to organize them taking into account the assets of your location. You know, we in New York, I think, had an easier job in some ways. You know, the global Olympics for most important city are over, and there are two cities that won, New York and London. And so I think we have an advantage because anyone who's not in New York would like to be here. And when we invited people to come to New York, we had 27 different schools from all around the world who said, can we please apply to build a school for you in New York City? And I don't think every other location has that type of drawing power. So my take would be, and when I've met with mayors from other cities, is to say, do an audit of what are your assets and what do you have that you think will bring people to your city, and then try to use the playbook of, like I said with Mayor Bloomberg, is it's what do you think we need and what's really important for the next 20 or 30 years? Can the city describe it and create an exciting destination, and does that draw interest from others? And you know, if it doesn't draw interest from others, maybe there's some knowledge in that, and that maybe you're kind of going up a hill that's a little too steep. So I think that that feedback loop is pretty important, and that's the right role of the city. But there's cities all around the world that have been successful at figuring out what are their strengths, and you can think of all of them where they've built on those, as opposed to saying, I'd like to be something I'm not going to be. I'd like to play in the NBA, but that's not a good bet.
So talk a little bit about working with Michael Bloomberg. So it looks often you had really good strategic calls. You could see an open space, you could craft a solution that really had a dynamic change effect. How did he think, and how did you work with him to have that thinking take place? Well,
I think, you know, it's a bit personal. It was an incredible honor to work with Mayor Bloomberg. You know, I'm a huge fan, so I'm not very balanced. He's the triple threat, and I challenge you to give me another one. If you look at success in business, philanthropy, and public service, you can find lots of other people that have one or two, but I don't know anyone else that has all three at the same level of success. That's point one. Yeah. Point two is I found his managerial style to have two characteristics. One, it was active communication, and two, distribution of responsibility. So on my first day, I said, Mr. Mayor, you know, how often do you want to meet? Tuesdays at 10 a.m., every other Tuesday, what's best for you? And he said, this is really simple. I walk past your desk about 7 times a day. And if I want to know something, I'm going to stop, and you should get off the phone at your convenience, and we'll talk about it. And if you want to talk to me, come stand next to my desk, and when I get off the phone, we'll talk about it. We don't need to schedule any meetings at all. So that tells you his style of communication. Second of all was that the city in New York runs through 50 agencies. Each one is led by a commissioner, and so there's police, there's fire, there's sanitation, there's housing, there's tourism, 50 of them. And the mayor was adamant that each one of these commissioners was the leader of their department. And he said, we have very strict principles and very flexible execution. The strict principles are we're going to be forward-leaning, we're going to be data-driven, we're going to measure our outcomes. We're going to be characterized by high integrity and transparency. Flexibility, that's up to you. So the transportation commissioner would say, I'd like to come tell the mayor about my plan to do more express bus lanes. He'd say, no thanks, I got it. You think you should do that? Fine by me. I don't need to. You're in charge of executing, and you're the CEO and the leader of the transportation department. And I think what that did was attracted people that really liked working for him because you were given a lot of authority The principles were clear. You got in big trouble if you violated one of the principles. If you weren't forward-leaning, if you weren't transparent, if you didn't measure your outcomes, if you weren't characterized by integrity, big problem. But as long as those were done, you should run it exactly as you wish. So you had lots of commissioners that worked for him wire to wire for 12 years in transportation, city planning, culture, places like this. The same commissioner stayed for 12 years because they felt really empowered and a great job and strongly supported. So that would be what I learned from working with Mayor Bloomberg, which, as you can tell, I'm a big fan. And so for me, it was really a privilege.
Well, Bob, you, the mayor, and that team have had a big effect on this city. It's been dynamic, it's been growing, and it's a great pleasure to be part of the family that made it happen. So thanks for their time.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you're attending the next session upstairs, please exit to your left. And now, please welcome CEO and co-founder, Honest Buildings, Riggs Kubiak.
All right. Thanks for having us, all the people that stuck around. This will be the most exciting panel of the day. We're here to talk about repositioning cities and how the built environment interacts with or creates or plays a part in the role of smart cities. And I think we have a very interesting and diverse group of people to think about it from a technology perspective, from people who are actually building smart cities today and people who are also like helping to foster the community that is the tissue or the connective tissue, I think, throughout smart cities, which is the people, which I think hits on like a lot of the trends of this conference and a lot of the stuff that we've heard throughout the day. So definitely excited to be here, and thank you all for joining. My name is Riggs Kubiak. I'm the CEO and founder of a technology business here in New York called Honest Buildings. We work exclusively with real estate owners to help them reposition buildings. So many of the largest owners in the country and now the world are using us to really help manage and track projects. And our mission is to help accelerate urban progress through the use of technology. So hopefully it sort of fits in a little bit to some of the stuff that we're talking about today. But in order to kick it off, I really want you guys to introduce yourselves, tell a little bit of a story in terms of why you're here and what you're working on and what you're passionate about.
So
yeah,
start?
down the line.
Okay, great. So thank you. So my name is Javier de la Torre, and I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Corkum. So at Corkum, we work with location data. So we are a software company providing solutions, analytical solutions to work with location data to help cities and other sectors to optimize their processes through predictions or location optimizations. So my story actually works on climate change, so working around, like what is the impact of climate change on a species, and since then, working with a lot of location data and, the analysis that enables, starting, to explore that, across other sectors and cities. It was an obvious one, right? So in the context of cities, we work a lot towards, applying new data sources of data, like what we know now almost on real-time census data, where people are, where do they work, and how we can use that to optimize, the processes that the city, how do they, do garbage collection. So many use cases like that. So we're based here in Brooklyn. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm Regina Myer. I'm the president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, which is the not-for-profit who's really bringing downtown Brooklyn into the 21st century as what I would consider the living laboratory for smart cities. Downtown Brooklyn has had this incredible resurgence over the past decade as one of New York City's great mixed-use neighborhoods. It used to really be a sleepy back office with a lot of issues in the decades beforehand. But at this point now, we have this amazing office sector, a tremendous amount of new housing, a really, really solid world-class cultural sector, and 8 colleges, universities, and law schools. And what that does is really provide the breeding ground for a tremendous amount of new thinking in New York City, and what I believe is leading the innovation corridor of Brooklyn and keeping Brooklyn on the map for new industries across all sectors. I'm really well positioned to be thinking in this way. I was previously the planning director for Mayor Bloomberg for the first part of his administration, leading most of the land use efforts in Brooklyn, including downtown Brooklyn, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and a good deal of our really great residential communities. And then for the last 9 years, I built Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is not just a great place to hang out, but also is a really, really sophisticated financial model where we've used new real estate development to fund almost $300 million worth of waterfront infrastructure. So I really love working with business and making sure that we have the growth that we need to keep Brooklyn competitive into the next century.
Hi, I'm David Ehrenberg. I'm president of the Navy Yard, so the landlord for today. The Navy Yard is a former naval shipyard, closed in the 60s and is now controlled by a mission-driven not-for-profit that I run. The yard, for context, is about 300 acres, so about half of the size of Central Park, about 2/3 the size of Prospect Park. So a really big holding. We're home to about 350 companies right now that employ 7,000 people, 7,500 people, come to work here every day. What's really interesting about us is that in the coming 3 years, we're going to go from 7,000 people, plus or minus, to about 17,000 people in the course of 3 years. And so there's a lot, and that's kind of based off an infrastructure of a mission-driven not-for-profit. So we're not a immensely capitalized real estate investment trust. And so we're trying to grapple with a lot of these issues that cities are trying to grapple with and use data and analytics and more efficient systems. We're grappling with those issues very much in real time, and think of ourselves as also a proving ground for those new technologies, and partially out of kind of interest and mission alignment, but also frankly out of necessity, because we got 10,000 people more coming to the Navy Yard than we've ever experienced, and we got to get ready.
My name is Kyle Corkum, and I'm with a community called Union Point. So our firm over the last decade has been revitalizing failed master plan communities around the country, and we were handpicked to take over an ex-Navy base outside of Boston. And so it was a brownfield site, a failed subdivision, and it had occurred to us that that wasn't realizing the full potential of that place. If you guys know Boston, you know there's no open land that's been undeveloped. It's very, very hard to create new projects. The zoning tends to discourage that sort of thing. But before we went and built the subdivision, as we had in the other examples around the country, we went around to the 3 towns in which we reside. We've got 1,500 acres, 10 miles south of the city limits. We had our own train station, a T-stop. It's 20 minutes to downtown Boston, and direct access to the major commuting road into the city. So the state had put a lot of infrastructure in place, and it seemed like it would be kind of wasted if we just built the subdivision, which is what we inherited. When we asked the towns what they wanted, they encouraged us to gather a big group, and so we kind of opened it up to everybody. Quite literally, we had 55 people, design professionals, town officials, planning people, but also lay people that had never worked on projects like this before, and even opposition to the project. We met 30 times over 3 months, 55 of us. The group came up with an idea for a city, and so we brought that to the 3 towns, and they adopted that. It didn't start as a smart city. It was just going to be a place for economic revitalization, jobs and taxes and housing. But then as we began to look at the potential of that, having this openness to these new ideas, we began to learn about ways that sustainability could become a really important part of what we were doing. Inclusivity could become a really important dynamic. Technology could be layered in because we're going to build it from scratch, unlike you guys taking a Navy base where you have to work with existing infrastructure. We get to build ours from scratch. So we're quite literally building a smart city from the internet up, as it's been said. So that's our story, and that's why we're here today.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It strikes me that as the population continues to move towards the urban environment, you know, I think it's 50% today, growing rapidly globally, that the types of projects that you guys are seeing and on a broader scale, the overhaul of Brooklyn, you know, over the last 10 or 15 years is a much larger version of the sort of microcosms that you guys are creating today, is something that potentially will happen more and more often in more and more cities. And given that you guys are real time, effectively creating these miniature smart cities that I think roll up to the smart city in the aggregate, and you've been in Brooklyn really watching the evolution of the smart city for a few years now, I'm curious what you've learned. Like, what would you do differently if you could rewind the tape from the beginning? And if you did it again, you know, next year, how would you think about it? Because I think that there's probably people here, and if not, you know, people on this panel will go on to do it again. And I'm very curious about maybe things that went wrong or things that you think could have been improved.
Go ahead. You
No, you go for it.
Oh, okay. I'll set the, sort of the broader picture. I think that what we didn't understand 10, 15 years ago was that how quickly things change and how much technology has promoted mixed use. And I think at this point, my advice would be never write a regulation that prevents you from doing anything really creatively. And we really promoted a lot of growth in Brooklyn, but we didn't understand initially how exciting it would be to work here. And I think that really that was the element that the people added. So many people started investing in Brooklyn, then they're the ones that said, wait a second, we want to work here too. And that's a pretty big sea change in New York City over the past 20 years, that we're seeing job growth not just in downtown Brooklyn, but here in the Navy Yard, in Williamsburg, in Sunset Park, and in Industry City. Those are major changes. Having United Technologies send some of their helicopter engineers to Dumbo, I mean, I can't even believe I just said that. And those folks only worked in Connecticut. And now that they want to be in Brooklyn, that really means that something different is happening in cities, and that major Fortune 100 companies are understanding that the next generation wants to be here. So I would just say, make sure that there's enough flexibility to really grow, and also it's about the mix. That's what's really exciting.
Yeah, I was going to say about the mix. I think that, you know, what's happened in New York, what's happened in Dumbo and across the rest of Brooklyn is really extraordinary, and the growth is, and having grown up in Brooklyn, is hard to imagine how quickly it happened, how quickly Brooklyn became a destination, not a place you got made fun of when you went to high school in Manhattan. But I think, you know, one of the dynamics and one of the challenges in New York right now is one of diversity, and particularly in Manhattan, where, you know, the rent structure of a lot of real estate is just becoming overwhelming to artists, and kind of diversity of tenant types that have defined New York for sure and Brooklyn for sure, and that's starting to happen to some extent in Brooklyn as well. And this is really self-serving, but here at the Yard, as a mission-driven not-for-profit, we're really focused on preserving not a antiquated mix of tenants, but a mix of tenants that is both tech-enabled, both forward-looking, but also has artists and has more traditional folks who have expertise that is impossible to replicate. And we do that partially because we're trying to curate an interesting mix of tenants, but it's also like you can't really curate it. The wonder of cities and the wonder of places like this is that, you know, you just put a bunch of ingredients together and stuff you never could have imagined would happen happens. And there's a risk, I think, that we're losing a little bit of that, the cauldron of that makes New York and other cities so great. I mean, I think Boston, I was just up there, and holy cow, that's a challenge in Boston.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point you make. We're extremely lucky that we had this superb blueprint just literally up the street, right? So you've got 100 colleges and universities, you've got tremendous cultural integrity there, right? And you've got everything from affordable housing and artists to, you know, affluence, all coexisting, and there's a human scale to all of it. So, so we were able to try to pattern ourselves after a lot of that. Once we got beyond the urban planning and then the beautiful architecture and then beyond the technology, we began to realize that really what we're doing is building community. So what I would say to people that are going to do this, get to that. You know, think about people with disabilities, right? So we're going to have environments where you will encounter people with Down syndrome in your normal, you know, part of your day. You'll buy coffee from them, and you'll encounter people that have physical disabilities that are comfortable in this environment. Blind and deaf people will find it to be a very welcoming environment. We'll be promoting ideas that have to do with mutual respect and understanding people of different cultures and backgrounds. That's what a city really is. That's what a community is. And I think for a long time when we were working on the technical parts of it, right, the beautiful parts and all that, we didn't understand the importance of that element. And now all that exists in Boston. So I would say keep it adaptable, creative, but also then think about the human element and promote that as a really important driving force.
Yeah, I love that.
Actually, I mean, like one of the things I think has significantly changed a lot is, well, I mean, like you were talking about like how fast things are happening now. So we think about like, you know, some cities and some of the ways the decisions are made with census data that is collected 10 years ago. Now you think about like 10 years ago, this was an entirely different place. So all this data that we are using, you know, like it's pretty, you know, like nowadays pretty outdated, right? And I think this is one of the things that we're seeing right now. Bigger change is, you know, like is the usage of, you know, like technology and to that extent, you know, like data to help, you know, like understand, you know, what is the demographics around your space, the impact of the actions that you're taking on the space, right? What are the visitors, you know, how is the traffic moves and so on. I think that is very different, you know, like, and I think more than you have to do it different, there's no other way to do that, any action like this without taking into consideration data that changes much more in real time than before. It just changes too quickly.
What's your advice for the builders from a data perspective on like how they should think about structuring data if they could do it over again?
Well, I mean, like, it really depends. I mean, it's probably very different, you know, to handle something like Brooklyn, tires, you know, like a city or a small, I mean, it's a space like, you know, like a Navy, right? But but I think, you know, like probably, I mean, like one of the things that we are like now realizing is that a lot of the data that we can actually make use is not necessarily, you know, data that you collect yourself. There's something we were just talking before we enter here about like how when you started, you know, like you were collecting people that enter on the place, you know, just manually, right? So some of these things are changing, but also thinking, you know, like towards, you know, solutions where you aggregate data from, you know, like telcos, financial data around the surroundings. So it's also trying to look outside of your own data and, you know, looking at, you know, how you can leverage that to understand better not only your place, but, you know, the surroundings around them, right? So, I mean, who would have thought like Dumbo will have such a huge economic impact, right? And it's changing almost every year. I mean, like it's really, really tough. So being able to kind of continuously monitor progress, I think is one of the key things. Not just do one-time analysis and then forget about it. You're going to have to continuously monitor, and you're going to have to think always on how do you establish KPIs and data dashboards and so on that will help you to monitor over time as things are changing, because they're going to be very different from when you started to when you get finished.
That's right.
What technology along those lines are you guys thinking about or using? Maybe it's around data, or maybe it's around mobility or connecting people. I mean, as you think about a smart city, I assume that one of the pillars of the smartness is really around technology.
I can tell you that, following up on Javier's example there, that one example I can point to in our city is that we know, for example, that as we introduce professional sports stadiums and our performing arts center into the entertainment district, that we will start to learn something about traffic patterns that will be dynamic. And as it's accepted and the use becomes more frequent, that it's critically important that we're monitoring that all the time, taking that data in, learning from it, that the smart traffic light system is adapting to that. That's just one simple example, but it's a superb point. This isn't a one-time thing. I hope 100 years from now, they're analyzing things we can't imagine at Union Point, but that's in our DNA, to be continually taking that information and then use that to make it a better environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a little bit probably different than you were intending the question, but we've worked a lot with our tenants trying to figure out what more we should be doing for them. And we thought there was going to be a lot of technical things they wanted from us, and it was interesting. There was a lot in there But overwhelmingly, when we went out and talked to tenants and the result of roundtables, what they wanted was access to each other, the community that you described. And the yard is big, it's 300 acres, pretty spread out. So creating that community is a challenge. And there's going to be a digital element to it. But what we're really interested in exploring, I don't think we have the right answer yet, is how do you meld the digital community with an actual physical presence? Because at the end of the day, that's what cities are, right?
Yeah.
Cities are not people walking down streets on their cell phones. They're collections of public squares that people interact with each other in. And I think that's I may be a little bit of a Luddite on this, but I think that's a big challenge for kind of the innovation economy and tech companies. How do you use the technology to actually connect people to each other physically, not just remotely and through Facebook and things like that.
Yeah, and what we're doing in downtown Brooklyn is one thing we're super blessed with already is this incredible transit network and a street system that really connects a downtown to a lot of adjoining residential communities. But what we're looking at doing next is, number one, really improving the ground plane for the same reasons David is thinking about that in the Navy Yard, providing a great downtown that's clean, that's a place where people want to hang out, that's fully activated, is really what people want. They want a 24/7 community. It sounds sort of corny, but the fact is that people who live and work and go to school in downtown Brooklyn want an increased level of activity and quality of life. So we're looking at how to do that in a lot of different ways, not just public spaces, but access on streets, access on bike. And then the other thing is using technology to make sure that our businesses and our shopping areas really understand who is coming downtown and how they can improve that experience. So we're, for instance, this is not so Luddite, but we're using our big belly trash cans to count people. And believe it or not, that's data that our companies want.
Yeah.
And that sounds sort of simplistic, and that's data that's collected just by footsteps, and there's no real infringement on personal rights. But I'm really surprised that tenants really want to understand exactly how many people are where and when. And that really is important because we need to know where we can get better also. Right. I think the next step is really understanding, we have a few major colleges and universities in downtown. I really want to spend time making sure that the students in downtown Brooklyn are connected to jobs. And we're putting a lot of effort into that through internships and social engagement, and looking for ways to partner with those colleges and universities to make sure they are connected to the businesses. So whether that be just simply by phone call, hey, you have a food and hospitality school, I've got a lot of people who need people, but also NYU and the amount of research they're doing in downtown, making sure that some of that research stays downtown.
Can I follow up on that for a second? Because
Yeah.
that's a superb point. We were lucky enough to have hired 3 great consultants, Elkis Manfredi, Sasaki, and VHB. They help us. They brought great ideas in from around the world and brought them to us. But I remember Howard Elkis focusing on creating squares, physical places that would bring people together. It was very important. And he would cite places in Europe and in Boston where it worked so well, and we would replicate those elements. But then David Manfredi sat me down one day and explained the importance of the colleges to the creation of this city. There are 100 of them just up the street, and they needed to have a big presence on our property. They fortify the businesses fortify the colleges. It becomes a really important part of making this all work. It's incredibly complex. It's more than just technology and good land planning and architecture. It's getting all those lessons from around the world and assimilating them to your spot. And so for us, colleges in the heart of the community is a very, very important initiative for us.
Yeah, it's a reinforcing feedback loop.
Yes.
That's fascinating. Well, you guys have seen interesting things, and you're seeing technology change very, very quickly. Well, where do you see the growth of smart cities? If you close your eyes and wave the magic wand, what what's a smart city look like in 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Keep in mind, I don't think Uber existed 5 years ago. So it's true. Interested to hear the crystal ball.
I mean, me personally, I mean, like, we can obviously talk about, like autonomous cars and how it's going to be, that disrupting the way that we do logistics in the city. That is, I guess, like, there was a few panels around that. So those are the obvious. I mean, from my point of view, the part that is most kind of like transforming, I mean, at least because it touches the way the things that we do is around, it's really the data, it's the availability of data, it's really understanding in real time what is happening and what it will happen. I think like, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence connected to the data that we're starting to collect will allow us to, to answer in a very sophisticated way, what it will happen if we do this, right? Which is, right, it's a very, very complex thing to answer. And we know, and we were talking about like how sometimes you will think that this is what it will happen and something else will happen, right? But if you have the possibility to actually run many models and say like, okay, what if we do this? What if we do that? What if we change this? What if we stop traffic here? What if, being able to kind of like ask these type of questions to a model, which is the city, and understand the responses from it, is going to allow us to essentially take like much, much smarter decisions that is going to transform the way that we think about like the projects that we do on them. So that's for me. And one example about it, tomorrow President Trump is coming to New York, right? And it's going to be in multiple locations. What is the impact of such a visit? Like what is, like the economic impact, how it's going to be the traffic, understanding that and being prepared for those events. It's not something that we planned like 2 years ago. We didn't know that, that was going to happen. It just came pretty recently. And the city is going to have to adapt, to those, situations in a very fast way. So I think that is where we're going to, first of all, like the city will be able to understand how it works as a system. We'll be able to communicate it to the citizens. We're doing this because it's the best solution, it's the most optimal solution, and also because we want you to engage on it, etc. So I think we're going to see much more on that direction from that.
Should you send everyone a text to tell them where to go tomorrow?
I should probably avoid certain places, with your car tomorrow. Yeah.
What do you think, Regina?
I'm going to flip the question and use it a little bit as a shameless plug for the Navy Yard. But so 5 years, I think that honestly, I think there are real challenges having worked for the city for 8 years in an extraordinarily forward-thinking city of New York City. There are real challenges in integrating new technologies into the day-to-day way that municipal governments run cities. And nobody should pretend that it's otherwise, and it's right? Like we've got huge infrastructure that 8+ million people rely on, and betting on a new technology that is to be proved is that's a big undertaking. And so I think, and as a customer of potential smart city applications at a much smaller scale, but where we've got some real challenges to overcome, it's also from a customer basis, it can be a little overwhelming, right? There are a lot of really amazing ideas and products out there. We can, train sensors to alert you to this, and this, and then, kind of figuring out when you're dealing with the day-to-day issues of running a little city within a city, which of those applications are really going to not only work, but you get you actionable data that you can actually use to improve the lives of your citizens or tenants on our part. It is a real challenge, and one that I think smart city companies need to really think through, particularly I think in place situations. It may be different when you're kind of building from scratch, but when you're like trying to integrate it into the current operations of an entity that has to continue to to function, right. It's like, building the plane while you're flying, it's a real challenge. And so one thing that we're looking at the Navy Yard is we're private property. So it may look like the rest of the city, but actually every single street here is our driveway. All of the pipes, all of the lampposts are actually just our yard furniture, as it were. And so where the city has long regulatory processes, the MTA has long regulatory processes, we can experiment, and we would want to experiment small and cheaply, so it's a cheap fail if it is a failure, but we can do that tomorrow. We can embed stuff in our street beds tomorrow. We can have driverless cars on our streets tomorrow, because we don't have to have a registration to have a car in the yard. So that's actually one place that we really think that we have a special role to play as a testing ground for stuff that's really not quite ready for prime time, or maybe ready for prime time and just you can't quite find the taker yet.
We have the first flying car in the Navy Yard.
Yes.
Sure. You're allowed to fly drones around here because, in fact, to fly a drone in New York, you have to have like the permission of every
Right.
property owner within X feet of you. And in New York, that's pretty hard because there are a lot of property owners and a lot of buildings. And here we've got 300 acres with one property owner.
We see, and so we have so many advantages. It's almost embarrassing sometimes. We have 1,500 acres,
Right.
one property owner. So we own everything. And so we have the ability to have unprecedented control over that built environment. We can put adaptability in that wouldn't normally exist in a place like this that's getting built. So we don't have to retrofit. We can build adaptability in, and we have enough control that we can plan for things we don't know about. So 5 years from now, if driverless cars are becoming prevalent, we have systems that anticipate that. The parking garages are designed to be adaptable, and as their use is not as frequent, we can start reusing parts or all of them for other things. Just one example. So we have the advantage of watching what happens when built environments struggle, and we've had the examples from around the world that we can aggregate those ideas, and then just try to do the best we can to put ourselves in this pure and adaptable, innovative environment. A lot of these technologies were developed right up the street at MIT and Harvard. And so for us, we can be a laboratory. They don't just have to be cheap.
Right.
We have the ability to say, bring all your good ideas. Let's test them. Let's see which ones work. Let's look at the data. Let's go back and refine it in collaborative ways. So for us, it's kind of like opening it up and saying to everyone, bring us your good ideas. Let's check them out and see how they work, because we control 100% of everything. We're going to retain 70 to 80% of the entire built environment. So we'll always be in a majority control position.
Right. And we only just met backstage, but we're kind of two sides of the exact same coin, right? Because when first of all, the real estate is relatively similar, right? Where
Right.
you've got pretty good real estate with some pretty good neighbors, and we've got Dumbo and Williamsburg and Brooklyn, which is amazingly the hottest thing on earth. And as the world urbanizes, and at rates that kind of make anything in the United States kind of seem like a pittance, a huge chunk of that is going to be in newly built from scratch buildings and neighborhoods and cities, and a huge part of that is also just going to be people forever crowding into smaller and smaller spaces in old line cities. So there's both challenges I think really have to be met, and having experimental grounds for both of those is and in a place and in a location that can get noticed, right? Where if you mess up, you just don't tell anybody, but if you've got a great success, you can get people from MIT or Harvard, or people visiting those places, or people visiting Manhattan to drive over and say, hey, look at my success, forget that thing over there that didn't work quite
Well, I
so
think
well.
there's value in talking about the failure too. I mean, we've got Arup advising us on all of the technological side of things, and they work all around the world. And so we're not afraid to say, listen, we're trying this, it's not working. I think there's value in that too.
Absolutely, yeah.
We want to
Fail
share
quick,
what we
fail
learn,
cheap.
yeah, exactly.
Again.
It seems to me like the future of the world is potentially in cities. This is a really big deal. It's a big challenge and a huge opportunity for really the human race. And I think for these type of really innovative projects to move forward, they need to move forward pretty quickly. It seems like working with the government entities is also super, super important. You guys have had a lot of experience doing that, and you're obviously working very closely with them. And it's interesting to think about data. We only have a couple minutes left, but I'd be very interested to hear about where there's opportunities to try and accelerate working in like a sort of public-private partnership to get projects done and try and accelerate the movement of some of these sort of innovative
I mean, I think that Brooklyn is a particularly great example of that. We've had an environment over the past two administrations where government has been particularly friendly to the business concerns and really understanding that we weren't going to solve issues of job access and affordability without really strong partnership with our business community. And so for the future in downtown Brooklyn, I think there's a few real challenges with increasing affordability and increasing job access, and there's really great locations for us to advocate for that. One of them actually is really the easy connection between downtown Brooklyn and the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've been really advocating to the current administration. Whoa. That is a place where we should really improve connectivity both on the ground plane between open space, street system, and also land use changes that would promote job growth in the right place. You know, David is very, very humble, but some of his current projects are really outward facing. I didn't do anything, did I?
We're okay.
And thank you. So, for instance, he's opening a major supermarket in a really key location between the Navy Yard and some of the adjoining neighborhoods, and that supermarket has the ability to bring people into an area that honestly hasn't seen any interest in, I'd say, half a century.
Wow.
And right.
More than that, yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
and so those are the kind of challenges from a public-private perspective we have to keep working on.
Yeah. What do you guys think? How can you accelerate the urban progress through working with the governments?
I can say in my case, it wouldn't be possible to do what we're doing if the state hadn't had the vision to put the T-stop in and build the parkway, and if the towns hadn't had the vision to create zoning. Everything that we want to do, if you've stopped by our booth, you can do everything in those images, 30-day approval process, in an environment where it can take you 3 to 5 years to get even the smallest thing done. So none of that would have been possible without a significant push from the top down, the government, local government and state government, to make that happen.
Amazing. What do you think, David?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think one part of it, part of our success here at the Yard, not on a smart city side, but just as a nonprofit and landlord, has really been embracing the community and really making clear to them that for everything that we do and all of these jobs that we're adding, it's not development for development's sake. It's not just putting up big buildings for the glory of putting up big buildings, but that it's jobs and that we're going to help connect the community to jobs. Same thing with innovation, that innovation here is a means towards an end of high quality, good paying jobs for the local community, and it sounds like you had very much that same conversation. And so I think technology providers can sometimes be a little forceful, particularly in their dealings with the public sector, and there's a time for that. But I also think that there's an underappreciated hunger amongst communities and cities to be included and to understand the narrative and understand the story of why technology isn't about gentrification and why technology and innovation is not about replacing the old with the new, but bringing in the new and augmenting the old. And I think that that's something that generationally and just in the kind of bent of technology can sometimes be overlooked. And it's also, it's hard work also to convince people of that. It's very hard work sometimes, and sometimes it's impossible work. I don't mean to belittle it. But where it's possible, I think that can really be a force for accelerating, not slowing down that kind of initiative.
Fascinating.
So actually, to that point, I mean, like one way to overcome that, right? I mean, some of the challenges working between, I think like in the case of smart cities in particular, it has a great potential because one of the core things that we are all trying to achieve here really is optimizing the way cities work. We all agree that there's a lot of, possibilities for optimization on the way the cities work. In fact, we do need that optimization to happen if we want to be sustainable. That is a must. We need to operate under better, service than we operate now. And I think, to that extent, how this, when there is such a possibility of, optimizing and improving, processes, that brings a lot of opportunities for the private sector. I mean, and that's what I was thinking, I don't think cities should be thinking around creating big data lakes and let's do innovation around big data. No, it should be thinking about improving particular use cases, particular processes, garbage collection, security here and there and so on. And optimization, essentially what enables is to optimize a process, and then you can do very quickly ROIs, returns on investments, based on how do you implement that technology. So I think like more we're going to see is these very practical cases where technology comes, and the same way that now it will be crazy to not use like some type of lighting systems, like we're going to see in cases like that. We're not going to do it another way. So there's going to be an easy like path between collaboration, because there's a lot to be won by both sides.
I think you're right, and I think I think that's like a good wrap up, because I think what we've heard today is it's really a combination between the built environment, the people and the community, and the technology, and the mixture of those, and the intersection in the Venn diagram between those three things, I think, is the opportunity for the future of the urban sort of smart city built environment. So thank you, everyone, for taking part of it.
Please welcome back Gianluca Galetto.
Hi everyone, I'm back. The powers that be wanted me back here. Just to remind you again, some of you probably were not here, so it's going to be useful. In Latin, we say repetita iuvant. It's useful to say the same things again. So we had a great day today. We're having a great day tomorrow. I want you to remember that we're going to be starting at 9. It's going to be a beautiful, interesting day. And later, you're going to have the Microsoft Patrol demo, and you're also here because you want to have some fun. So it's nice to do that. And UrbanX, which is the BMW incubator, is hosting a party. It's called the Smart City Startup Celebration, and it's in Greenpoint on, if I remember, 21 Norman Avenue. And finally, to go there, you can use your transportation of choice. And the best way is to go to the Sand Street exit, where you get the Uber, Lyft, and again, my offer still stands. You can have free rides on my Vespa, the coolest and smartest technology of smart mobility. Have a good night, and see you all tomorrow.